Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to thank everybody for being here this morning. And I'd also like to take this moment to recognize our partners in putting on this program. I'm Ken Hirsch, the President and CEO of the Bush Center, and it's an honor to be here. But also to recognize that a program like this means more because we're able to partner with great organizations. The Bipartisan Policy Center, the World Affairs Council, the Mission Foods Texas Mexico Center, and the SMU John Goodwin Tower Center. These are wonderful partners. This is an important topic, and important results are made better by partnerships. So it's one of my objectives here at the Bush Center to make sure that people understand the power of partnership and the power of bringing thought leaders together. A minute about the Bush Center for those that are not familiar. The design here, and this building has been open for about 4 years now, has been to continue the great work that was started by President and Mrs. Bush when they were at the White House, and then to take on new work inspired by them and their principles. Our values that we live by here are about political and economic freedom, less government dependency, and a strong and compassionate country here and abroad. Our direct mission is to develop leaders, advance policy, and take action to address today's most pressing challenges. And we do that through our 3 impact centers: domestic excellence, global leadership, and our engagement agenda. Domestic excellence: to be a great country, you ought to have strong economic growth, great education, take care of your veterans, and develop future leaders. And those are the 4 initiative areas of our Domestic Excellence Impact Center. And for global leadership, it's about global health, human freedom and democracy, and empowering women. And those are the main focus areas in our Global Leadership Impact Center. And then our engagement agenda is how we engage the world. We do that through our programming, we do that through this building, we do that through our relationship with SMU and the community, and we do that through our publications and outreach, and today is an example of that. Back to domestic excellence, number 1 is economic growth. And for us, economic growth can't be separated from trade. And about 2+ years ago, President Bush really saw the tea leaves, and with the entirety around thinking through our programming, it was important for us, especially in this region, to have a strong platform respecting the benefits of trade. And so that began our focus a couple years ago. And for us, it's about competitiveness, and it's about North America, and it's about a trilateral relationship. And we've been able to convene working groups, we've been able to convene our advisory board, we've been able to put out stuff on our website, bushcenter.org, where you can check our competitiveness scorecard, and an entire suite of thought leadership that I need to say thank you to and congratulations to Holly Kuzmich, who's in the back of the room, our executive director for the Bush Institute, and Matt Rooney, our director of economic growth, and Laura Collins, who's the deputy director of economic growth, who really are the thought leaders on this topic area. And today, this paper that we're putting out is the culmination of another body of work where we really celebrate what trade means and what North American trade means and the benefits of that to just about everybody in North America. Doesn't mean there aren't challenges, but there is a way forward, and the way forward is described in this wonderful thought piece. So I think that today, this is an important element of the conversation, and we're happy to put it on. Anyway, with that, I'd like to continue the conversation and introduce Jason Gourmet, one of our partners in this endeavor, the founder and president of the Bipartisan Policy Center, and his biography is, I don't want to waste his time by regurgitating his biography because it is a very long one. You can see that in the program. Jason, please join us, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. I want to, of course, thank Ken and the Bush Center, also acknowledge Jim Falk at the World Affairs Council and the Texas, Mexico, and Tower Centers here at SMU. NAFTA is fundamentally about partnerships, and so I think it is important to the spirit of this whole conversation that we find collaborators, particularly folks who have the kind of legacy you all have here at the Bush Center. I think it is the President's commitment, President Bush's commitment to global engagement and diplomacy that's really strengthened the country, and I think is a terrific predicate for the conversation we will have today. I want to tell you just a few words about the Bipartisan Policy Center and then situate our panel. Bipartisan Policy Center was founded about 10 years ago with the support of 4 former Senate Majority Leaders. We are aggressively bipartisan. We believe in productive pragmatism, productive partisanship, a collision of ideas between proud Democrats and proud Republicans who can sit down at a table and disagree in a way that actually moves the debate forward. Our engagement on NAFTA grows out of work that we've done over energy policy, ag policy, border security, and economic growth. We also try to provide the infrastructure for members of Congress like Will Hurd, who actually want to venture the kind of collaboration that requires help. Part of the support we will be offering Congressman Hurd today will be filling in for him for the first 30 minutes as he flies in from San Antonio. The dark clouds were not in our favor this morning, but he will be joining us. To switch over a little bit to the conversation today, I think something you all know well, but is less obvious to many in D.C., Texas is truly ground zero for the NAFTA debate. And we find it powerful that a state that has such a fierce reputation in history and independence is actually the leader in North American economic interdependence. Now, NAFTA has always been controversial, and it is not perfect. It is a 23-year-old agreement, brought together before we all had these little powerful computers in our pockets. There are ways in which we can strengthen this agreement, but we believe we have to be mindful of its existing capacity and make sure that in the process of trying to advance the discussion, we don't take for granted the incredible benefits to our economies and our security that the agreement has provided. At the Bipartisan Policy Center, we still have a quaint affinity for evidence. Our goal today is to try to bring forward some of the facts upon which one can have a good, meaningful debate. We also are releasing a report today that examines some of the impacts that NAFTA has enabled. And just a couple of quick statistics. Overall, U.S. trade with Canada and Mexico has more than tripled since the agreement was struck. Canada and Mexico are responsible for 1/3 of all U.S. exports and 1/4 of our imports. So this is not something happening on the margins of our economy. Canada and Mexico are the first or second largest export market for 43 out of the 50 U.S. states. So again, this is not just Texas. This is something that affects the country, I think, far more than most are aware of. And it's estimated that 14 million U.S. jobs are directly dependent upon trade with Canada and Mexico. So I come from the swamp. I am a proud swamp dweller. I actually believe that our democracy has great potential to solve problems given the right incentives. But this one's going to be tough. Our Congress has committed to try to now engage and resolve these complex questions by the end of the year, which is very fast. There is also obvious concern that with the agenda before Congress and some of its current challenges, it's not going to be easy for Congress to vote on something that has this kind of intense polarization and a lot of mythology. So we are working closely with the administration and Congress, and we'll hear from Congressman Hurd later this morning, about what we can do to actually, in a meaningful way, address the concerns and some of the, frankly, outsized political grievance that has been associated with NAFTA. The country is in a profound, dynamic transition with new technology, significant dislocation, and a lot of pain and alienation. And NAFTA has become the symbol for much of that. So it is not going to be easy for our Congress to engage these questions, and our hope with events like this morning is we provide a little bit of substantive imperative for that discussion. We have a really good panel for you. I want to introduce our moderator, Wade Goodwin. Wade, who has a great radio voice, is one of the national correspondents for NPR. He has covered everything from politics to natural disasters, focused on immigration, the border, business, some very high-profile court cases. He also began his career here in 1991, so he has a real-time, on-the-ground sense of what's happened to the region, and he's going to help guide the discussion. I will be sitting in for Congressman Hurd for somewhere between 5 and 45 minutes, depending on the skills of our Southwest pilot, but he will be here. So thank you very much. Appreciate the partnership. Appreciate your joining us this morning. Wade.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to the George W. Bush Institute, the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Tower Center, the Texas-Mexico Center, and the World Affairs Council for putting this together. It's a very important program, a very timely topic. We typically think of NAFTA and trade policy generally as an economic matter. But as we'll discuss today, it's very important to other aspects of the relationship between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Today we're going to hear from Representative Hurd, Javier Velez, the CEO of Mission Foods, and Tiffany Melvin, the President of the North American Strategy for Competitiveness. Representative Hurd represents the 23rd Congressional District of Texas, which is on the border between Texas and Mexico. He was elected in 2015. He was formerly an undercover officer in the CIA. He currently serves on the Committee of Oversight and Government Reform, the Committee on Homeland Security, and the House Permanent Select Intelligence Committee. Additionally, Representative Hurd is a member of the U.S. Mexico Interparliamentary Group. Javier Velez is the CEO of Mission Foods, the largest manufacturer, distributor, and marketer of packed tortillas and related products in the United States, with sales around $2 billion. Javier has led the transformation of Mission Foods into a full-fledged consumer goods company, growing revenues by 20% just in the last 4 years. Tiffany Melvin, as we've talked about, is the president of North American Strategy for Competitiveness, or NASCO. NASCO is widely respected tri-national coalition focusing on freight logistics, energy and the environment, and skilled workforce and certification problems. Please welcome them. After you. Sure. All right, so I thought maybe we'd begin by just having the panelists give some opening remarks. Ms. Melvin, would you like to start us?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much to everybody for coming this morning. We have a great turnout, and thank you so much to all of our hosts for inviting me. I'm excited to be here to talk about this very important and timely issue. There are a few faces that I recognize out there that know a little bit about NASCO, but there are a lot of new faces out here in this audience, so I thought I'd take a little bit of time just to explain my organization and talk a little bit about, it'll just kind of shed some light for you guys on sort of my insights and perspectives as we move forward with the panel. So, and also because we're here in Dallas-Fort Worth. So NASCO stands for North American Strategy for Competitiveness. I have had a couple of questions this morning about how we got our start, because we've been around since the inception of the original NAFTA. And we really got our start here in Dallas-Fort Worth as the I-35 Corridor Coalition. And at that time, it was right after NAFTA had been enacted, and some industry and local governments came together to discuss this NAFTA thing, whether it was going to be good, bad, or ugly. We already had so much truck traffic on I-35 in this area as a result of North American trade. People tend to forget that there was North American trade before there was NAFTA. And so we had a lot of trucks moving, and then now with this NAFTA thing, are there going to be more trucks? We assume so. How do we take this opportunity and make it a good opportunity instead of a crisis, a quality of life issue with massive congestion? So when we first started, we were really looking at I-35. At the time, they had earmarks in Congress, so we were looking at getting earmarks to expand capacity, how to make sure we've got good freight movement through the area. And then really from that moment, we have grown organically over the years. We started growing south, down towards Laredo, the largest border crossing on the southern border, and picked up several counties and cities and industry members along the I-35 route. And then we grew north. Again, very organically, with our members, with our current members, saying to other people that they knew or that were in their networks about transportation and freight, hey, you should get involved with this I-35 thing. So as we started growing, we recognized that freight doesn't just move on I-35. It's not all about trucks. It's coming in from every mode, every direction. So over the years, we've grown along the Mid-Continent corridor. Our first Canadian member was the province of Manitoba, and then they started introducing us to other Canadian members. And so really, at that time, when we started going beyond just the North Texas, in the Texas area, we changed our name to North America's Corridor Coalition, billing I-35 as North America's figurative corridor. And then I'll kind of go blah, blah, blah through the years. We've grown, 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 grown. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, we became a truly continental organization. And we changed we kept our acronym, but changed the words to mean North American Strategy for Competitiveness. So as we stand today, we have members from all over Canada, the United States, and Mexico. We have government, we have industry, we have academia, we have provinces, states in the U.S., states in Mexico, we have cities, counties, we have economic development corporations, chambers, we've got industry that covers every level of the supply chain, we have global corporations on down to very small businesses, we have retailers, manufacturers, all the modes of transportation, water ports, inland ports, and then we have educational institutions that are colleges and universities, graduate programs, community colleges, and we even have some close partnerships with independent school districts. So we are a vast, diverse network of members, and our 3 main focus areas are supply chain and logistics, energy and the environment, and closing the skilled workforce gap. So again, supply chain and logistics, energy and the environment, and closing the skilled workforce gap. So we are advocates in these 3 areas, and then we also have action plans in these 3 areas. And so as you might imagine, with our 23-year track record now, this NAFTA discussion comes up, and we're very, very well poised to engage in the discussions and work with lots of organizations and our members to try to move things forward. So we've been, over the past few months, collecting NAFTA recommendations from our members. We've been working with lots of organizations that are out there, bilateral organizations, industry associations, to really try to come up with some good, common, hard-hitting messages to the administration about how to modernize NAFTA. Number one, that NAFTA has been a big success. NAFTA has worked. Optimize NAFTA, we understand there's a need to modernize it and to add some provisions to it that, things that didn't even exist 24 years ago that are now needing to be added to the agreement. Do no harm. You can add those things, amend them, but please don't go backwards because our supply chains are so integrated and so much industry and government really relies on that free flow of goods and movement. Do it quickly, do it trilaterally. Those are our common messages. But so at NASCO, we also want to provide the message that do the doable now. So don't let, while we're renegotiating or modernizing NAFTA, stop the great work that has already been done and that our group is doing and lots of other groups are doing to improve North American competitiveness and our border crossings and our security and our trade. So customs automation, border facilitation, smart borders and technologies, regulatory alignment, the talent pipeline, training skilled workers. There's a lot of effort underway that's really outside the scope of NAFTA that we have been working on for years and should not be stopped while we're renegotiating NAFTA. We're not even sure what will actually be included in the final modernization of NAFTA. And so a lot of our members' recommendations came to us, and some were very specific about the original NAFTA, but a lot of the recommendations were more about North American competitiveness and a little bit outside the scope or the potential scope of NAFTA, and that is a good thing. NAFTA is critical. We are scope locked on it right now. We want at NASCO to do everything we can to inform a good modernization of NAFTA, to work with the expertise of our members, to work with our connections at the highest levels, to make sure the messages are getting through and that everyone's informed as they go into a negotiation. And that's on a trilateral approach, mind you, not just with the U.S. But doing the doable now, we can only control so much. We're not going to be in the room with them when they actually do the negotiation. So what can we control? The work that our organization does. So trying to connect business opportunities together and keeping the fight going for North American domination in the global marketplace. So doing that one success story at a time. Work on the single window, move that forward. One single window, one North American single window. Maybe it's one improvement to an inland port or a border crossing, or lending a hand and training one worker, a skilled worker that actually gets placed in a job. Like, these are the things we do at the grassroots level. NASCO is a grassroots organization. All of our members come from, the grassroots. We're not, emboldened or kind of controlled by any sort of federal agency or organization. So we are trying to make sure that at the grassroots level, we're moving North America forward, one bite at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, one success story at a time. That might have been more than 3 minutes. I'm sorry.
Mr. Villette.
Thank you, Wade. I'm very glad to be here with you today. Thank you on behalf of Mission Foods and on behalf of myself. I think it's a privilege to be here. I work with Mission Foods. Mission Foods came to the U.S. 4 years ago simply exporting products from Mexico to the U.S. 4 years later, We have 20 manufacturing plants across the U.S. We manufacture and distribute 100 million tortillas per day that have to be distributed in all stores so that you all can eat fresh tortillas.
Yeah.
At the beginning, we came behind the Mexican immigrant. Mexican immigrant included tortillas in their diet. Eventually, tortillas evolved into a mainstream food item. Now you can see tortillas across all population groups. And today, we're before this tremendous opportunity of transforming tortillas into the food companion of choice, beyond the Mexican cuisine. And I think the result, the Mission Foods is a result, to a large extent, of economic integration. This is why we believe in economic integration. We can say that economic integration has been present in all eras of long-term prosperity, of well-being in the history of mankind. Just in the last 50 years, the globalization of the world has made economic growth evolve at a rate unprecedented. This economic growth has lifted over 1 billion people out of poverty, according to the World Bank. And this growth and international trade have resulted also in better and more goods and services for all participants, has offered many countries good investment opportunities, and no less important, it has offered also hopes for a more peaceful world. However, in the last 9 years, global trade, internationalization, globalization, economic integration has been questioned. International trade has slowed down dramatically. Cross-border lending has also slowed down rapidly. Trade is questioned too. The U.S. decided not to go with TPP. The United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union. And the U.S. wants to review NAFTA. We believe that this is a great opportunity not to review NAFTA with the idea of getting rid of some imbalances that any economic agreement after 23 years has shown. I think that we need to review NAFTA with a very long term in mind and with an open mind. We need to evolve NAFTA into a more comprehensive integration treaty that involves not only international trade, but that involves important aspects in between Mexico and the US and Canada, such as immigration. What about the coordination of economic policies, of monetary policy, of fiscal policy? Just to give you an idea, mortgages in the US range in between 3 to 4% last time I checked. In Mexico, mortgage rates are between 11 to 15%. If we somehow could coordinate better our monetary and fiscal policies, it will translate in tremendous benefits for the overall Mexican population, offering good investment opportunities too. So I think that we should review NAFTA with a 25-year horizon. It's important how NAFTA is going to evolve in the next 3 to 4 years, but it's more important how these 2 or 3 large economies will integrate better to be able to compete effectively with the rest of the world. Thank you. And Sorry I
you.
took also
No.
3 minutes.
I will cede the balance of my time to Congressman Hurd. when he
You're doing a
arrives.
good job. You're doing a good job. Well, our theme today is NAFTA, why it's the worst trade deal ever signed, why it's not the worst trade deal ever signed. Tiffany, is it the worst trade deal ever signed?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's my answer. I mean, no, it's one of the greatest examples of how three countries can work together, two developing nations with, at the time, two developed nations with one undeveloped nation or developing nation, and that the rising tide can lift all boats. It was an innovative way to come together for our continent, with our partners to the north and south. As there have been a lot of statistics floating around, I mean, it's brought economic prosperity to all three nations. I think in the U.S. alone, there are 14 million jobs that are tied to trade with Canada and Mexico. You know, people can talk our supply chains are so integrated that as a result of NAFTA and the platform, you got to remember NAFTA is a platform. I mean, it was a trade agreement, but if no one had actually taken advantage of it, there would have been nothing. So it's a platform that companies saw the opportunities, saw the advantages to work with Mexico and Canada and the United States, making things together. We produce things together. It has created jobs in all three countries. It has retained jobs. But for NAFTA, a lot of industries might have moved everything over to Asia. So a number that's not talked about a lot is the retention of jobs, because if you start operations in Mexico or in Canada, you need jobs in the United States to finish those supply chains and to be a part of those supply chains. So there's not just the jobs created in each country, but the jobs retained in the United States and in North America that now are to the tune of about 14 million jobs. The costs of goods in the marketplace are lower because of free trade agreements and because of NAFTA. And a lot of people don't recognize that these trading agreements and the movement of freight, that the cost of goods in the marketplace is a transportation and logistics cost. It's insurance premiums for those transportation and logistics costs and a lot of the fuel costs. The product is a very small part of the actual cost of goods. So if you start doing away with these free trade agreements, the cost of goods in the United States and Canada and Mexico would skyrocket. That's not going to be good for anyone's bottom line. So it provides a quality of life. It provides, and in Mexico being a developing economy at that time, the Mexico economy is doing great. They have so much foreign direct investment. They now have 42 free trade agreements, I think, or 46 free trade agreements. There's a lot of foreign direct investment from around the world. Mexicans are going back to Mexico because there's opportunity there. So when you talk about the ability of NAFTA to help bring Mexico into a developed economy where now we have Mexicans wanting to go back for opportunity, that's a great thing, because oftentimes trade and free trade agreements get intertwined with immigration issues. So people are not very aware of the fact that the Mexicans are not coming to the United States anymore. It's at an all-time low. They're actually going home. So you hear things in speeches, you hear things floating around out there. I mean, we've tried to get North America in the news for decades, and it hasn't been positive North American success stories. And it's been very difficult to get media to report on them because it's not been sexy. Well, so now we don't have that problem anymore. North America's in the news. So we're hoping that people are coming, and we are having a lot of people come out of the woodwork to talk about the positive effect of North America and NAFTA trade agreement. But you can't believe everything you hear in the news. You can find statistics to support just about any argument you can make. So it's important to note that all three countries have benefited greatly by NAFTA. All three countries have had job creation, job retention, the economies are stable, and there's something beyond just NAFTA to think about that you want, from a U.S. perspective, you want your neighbors to the north and south to not have so much macroeconomic volatility and to be partners and neighbors and family members. We call it NASCA, we call it our North American family. But Mexico does so much for us, and I'm not an expert in all this stuff, but I mean, for like the visa requirements, if the United States has countries that are sort of on our visa watch list where we don't give visas to those countries, Mexico also does not give visas to those countries because they want to be a good partner to us so that we don't have potential terrorist countries coming into Mexico and then coming across our southern border. So there are relationships that NAFTA has developed over time with the federal governments, watching our backs, watching each other's backs. And so when you start talking about undoing NAFTA or withdrawing from NAFTA and damaging those relationships, it is very dicey, and it should be, it really shouldn't, a lot of the rhetoric that's out there now should not be tolerated at all. And I think people that are believing some of the rhetoric that are out there are simply uninformed about the importance of NAFTA on their daily lives. At NASCO, we have a thing where we talk about freight and trade agreements, and that everything you touch, see, eat, smell, use all day long got there on a truck, a train, a ship, or a plane. Things don't just poof into existence. You've got to get raw materials to the factories and products to market. And all that is supply chain and logistics and trade agreements. So it's really, really important to understand this stuff. And so I'm sorry I'm doing a super long answer.
It's all right.
But the congressman isn't here yet, so, you know. But I just want, I can't emphasize enough the success of NAFTA and the potential success of the TPP, which we've just withdrawn from. That was going to be an opportunity to modernize some of the NAFTA language. So now we're going to do it on our own with NAFTA and modernization. But these things, you know, are critical to the quality of life in North America and to not just our economic prosperity, but our security as well.
Mr. Velez, Mission is a company that is not going to dry up and blow away if NAFTA goes away, but talk to me about its importance to your company and kind of how you see it.
Well, in the case of our company, we'll evolve into a self-contained operations in the U.S. We source from here most of our inputs, and we sell here 100% of our products. But what I would like to say, if I may, Wade, is that in my view, NAFTA has been really successful. In contrast to what happened with the global trade that I mentioned a few minutes ago, global trade got kind of stagnant, international funding got stagnant at the global level. But NAFTA, in NAFTA, the trade has accelerated. Imports have been growing at 15%, exports also at about 15% since the financial crisis of 2008 to now. It has made, as I said before, basic goods and services available at better prices. And I would like to give an example. Mexico imports basic grains from the US, especially corn and wheat. In Mexico, it would be impossible to grow corn and wheat in the amounts that the Mexican diet requires competitively. And the best place in the world, by a wide margin, to grow corn and wheat is the US. The second example is fruits and vegetables. Mexico is a paradise for growing fruits and vegetables because of the microclimate situation we have in Mexico. We can produce fruits and vegetables all year round, depending on the region. I don't know if you guys know, but 2/3 of the tomato consumed in the US during the winter comes from Sinaloa, Mexico. 2/3 of the consumption, not of the production, the consumption of tomato. So tomato, Mexican tomato is good, healthy, and affordable. And the same I can say for avocado and the rest of fruit and vegetables. Mexico is exporting to the US, I think, $12 or $15 billion per year. And that exports of fruit and vegetables have been growing at 2 digits too. So this is a clear benefit for both countries. Not to mention the automobile industry. I think that Mexico allowed the automobile industry to survive in the last 15 years. I really have doubts that the automobile industry in the US would exist today without this massive investments in Mexico since the early 90s up to today. Thank you.
Ms. Melvin, you decried the rhetoric that is surrounding NAFTA. Tell us more about what you're talking about. What's the rhetoric that disturbs you?
That it was a disaster.
And why are you
the worst trade agreement. I'm laughing because I get a lot of this question as I'm out and about on my travels. The rhetoric that we all hear, I mean, a big one, I mean, obviously there's one that it was a disaster, the worst trade agreement in the history of the world, you know, that kind of a thing. But there's some about jobs being lost, and I think this is a big misconception here, is that all the jobs were lost to Mexico and Canada from the United States. And, you know, jobs were mostly not lost as a result of NAFTA. They were lost as a result of advances in manufacturing and the technologies that have been introduced. And in the U.S., we don't have, you know, a lot of those people that, I want to say, and I'm going to get the statistic probably super wrong, but I think it's around, technically lost jobs from NAFTA in the U.S. is around 278,000, I think. But like I said, 14 million jobs depend on trade with Mexico and Canada. So that's a huge number difference, all right? And while it's horrible for the 278,000, and that's what gets a lot of this, everyone knows an uncle or a brother or a sister or a mom or a daughter that's lost their job potentially because of NAFTA. But I think that number gets super inflated, and that they really aren't losing them from NAFTA. It's the advances in manufacturing, and our workforce has not kept up. Our training programs have not kept up. And so that's one of the reasons why NASCO has taken on the workforce training component, is to help try to get to grassroots communities who might have been affected or displaced by trade, to help them get trained. But there's a lot of discussion going on about, well, some of those people are waiting for their jobs to come back, and let's bring back the manufacturing jobs to the U.S. But there's a lot of discussion out there that bringing back jobs, those types of jobs to the U.S. means they're just going to be lost again in a few years with, again, advances in manufacturing if we don't have the training programs in place to help the workers get the skills to do the jobs. I've heard recently mentioned of a relocation incentive, which I had not heard before. I have no idea where this stands in Congress. I was in D.C. at the time, but it sounded like an interesting concept to me, that rather than having people that are sitting in their communities, like people don't want to move today. You know, decades ago, people were willing to move to get a new job. You lost your job somewhere, okay, where is the best next job for me, and let's move my family there. That's not happening as much. People want to stay put. But then they're collecting unemployment, or they're on welfare or whatever, and do they want the training? No, I don't want the training. I want my old job back. So there's a mentality there, right? I mean, there's a mentality there that we have to help and get people excited about taking the training and learning a skill that can be very useful in their community. The other thing is that if we could provide incentive to relocate, that might be a better use of some government funding potentially to get them to relocate to an area where there are lots of jobs readily available and get them off the government dime of unemployment or welfare. So there's lots of different ways to talk about it, but I mean, back on the rhetoric, the big one that really irks me is when people say so many jobs, millions of jobs have been lost to NAFTA. That's not the case. In fact, NAFTA helped create jobs and retain jobs, like I just mentioned. You would think that I would have all the rhetoric just flowing, free flow. I'm trying to think of other rhetoric that's out there, but that's a big one. That's good enough.
That's
Okay.
fine. And I mean, jobs is a big part, I think, of what the president is concerned about. I think he feels like international agreements, it's both trade and climate accords that the U.S. negotiated before he became president, resulted in the U.S. getting short shrift. What is the climate in Washington, and what has to happen for the president to feel like he's going to be happy with what we have going forward?
So coming to Texas and being asked to explain the cognitive inclinations of our president, I think, is something I will be careful about. But I think you are certainly right to point to the fact that the kind of animating energy for the president's election was a sense of grievance from a lot of people who have reason to be grieving. You know, I think that there, you know, over the last decade, just, you know, one sense, the basic wages have been flat for 3/4 of Americans. At the same time, the cost of in-state tuition has gone up by a factor of 3. Half the adults in this country don't believe that they could get their hands on $300 in a week without selling something. So people are scared, right? You're one broken ankle, busted roof away from not being able to pay your mortgage, and you can't imagine how you get your kids through college. That is a very, very real problem for this country. It's unfortunate that the sense of international engagement has become understood to be an outsized cause of that alienation. I think everyone on this panel would agree that there are many different factors that are out there. But we do have to engage this sense of alienation. One of the concerns we have is that we get into rooms like this, where probably, if we ask for a show of hands who thinks we should rip up NAFTA, not a lot of people would be standing up. If that question was put before Congress right now, NAFTA good or bad, if it was just a referenda without a lot of detail behind it, there's a very real chance that we would lose. So, I think it's very important for us to say to each other, do no harm. But I think we have to be very careful not to imagine that that understanding is in fact widely held. And so I think the president is going to need to stand up and indicate that he has improved this agreement in ways that will bring jobs back to the country. I also think it will get wrapped up into the conversation about border security. And I won't go into the tactical questions before the congressman arrives, but there are some things that the executive branch can do and some things that only Congress can do. And I think the president is probably going to have to make some executive actions if we want this to happen before the end of the year. If it goes to Congress, it is going to drag out.
And to the extent that, if you said, ask for a show of hands in Congress, and you're anxious about what the count would be, those negative votes would be voted on in and around what idea, what issue for them?
So, this is, as the head of the Bipartisan Policy Center, I'm here to tell you that bipartisanship creates the best and the worst outcomes in our nation's capital. When you have a sense of uninformed fear, you wind up getting the left and the right kind of meeting around the dark side of the moon, doing some pretty bad stuff, right? So NAFTA animates a kind of nativist anxiety that I think has been part of kind of recent far-right rhetoric, as well as the labor voice, which has been very anxious since the passage of NAFTA. And so you can see 40% on the left, 40% on the right ambivalence about NAFTA resulting in a bad vote. It comes from somewhat different reasons, but it all does come back to this sense that we are losing opportunity, that this imagination of you work hard, you can get ahead and put your kids through school is in fact not actually a meaningful aspect of that American dream for too many people.
Let's pretend that the president decides that, like the British Prime Minister, that no deal is better than a bad deal. What would our world look like if we never done NAFTA? And what if we stop having a trade agreement, what will it look like going forward? Let me start with you, Ms. Melvin, if I could, and then Mr. Velez.
I don't know. I shudder to think about what it would have looked like without NAFTA originally, but since I've lived through NAFTA, I don't really have I can talk better about, I think, of what would happen were we to withdraw from NAFTA in the future. I think, and this is, my opinion, but like I mentioned in my opening kind of remarks, depending on how the administration and Canada and Mexico move forward with the modernization or amending or total renegotiation of the agreement, I think we will learn a whole lot more in the future that will help shed some more light on what they intend to negotiate, the extent to which they intend to either amend or renegotiate. And so I could probably better answer this question like every day as we learn more information. But if we were to withdraw completely, the cost of goods in the marketplace are going to go up. Our companies that have integrated supply chains are going to be burdened. Now, I do know that a lot of our companies that do North American trade say we're North American companies before NAFTA, we're North American companies during NAFTA, and we'll be North American companies after NAFTA. So I don't think there'd be a mass exodus from doing business with North America because our supply chains are so integrated, but the cost of goods, everything that is produced together, which is a lot of stuff on this continent, would be more expensive because they're going to pass the cost, the increased burden of doing business with one another onto the consumers. So I think when you get to that situation, if the costs of everything in the marketplace go up, or almost everything, you're going to have a lot of those, the people that have the fear of NAFTA, that listen to the rhetoric about NAFTA, that might have been big promoters of the Trump election because he was going to fix NAFTA or withdraw from NAFTA, would recognize that, oh my gosh, NAFTA actually affected me far more than I realized by keeping the costs of goods low, and I'm having to pay so much more. And they might be one of those people that can't find $300 without selling something off. So I feel like the backlash of us withdrawing completely from NAFTA would be so great that it might be hard for, all the cameras. It might be hard for the president to get reelected on the same campaign promises of NAFTA, and might end up with a new president that came in and said, let's pick this thing up and dust it off and move forward and fix this. But I will say, like I said in my opening remarks, that while NAFTA is critical, and we need to be doing everything we can to make sure that it's modernized and negotiated properly and fairly and win-win-win, there are a lot of things outside the scope of NAFTA that can move forward to make North America and keep North America competitive, related to border security and trade, related to regulatory alignment, customs automation, a lot of things out there that will make our supply chains more effective, more secure, infrastructure at borders, staffing at border crossings, the workforce training, a North American platform for workforce training. A lot of the efforts that are underway now won't be affected one way or another by NAFTA. So there's a bit of optimism. And I really don't think withdrawal is on the table anymore. I certainly hope it's not. But Secretary Ross and U.S. Trade Rep Lighthizer, I think they have a very solid understanding of the importance of the U.S. relationship to Mexico and Canada. I think that they're saying all the right things now, that they've heard the messages from industry and associations and from governments and from Mexico and Canada. So I think I'm more optimistic. I hope that the withdrawal is not even on the table, but I think worst case, there'd be some backlash. That would be a true disaster, but it wouldn't be something that we couldn't recover from.
Mr. Velez, I think it's fair to say that the president has roiled the political situation in Mexico, the demands that Mexico pay for a wall that he would construct, and some of his other comments. To the extent that you have a sense of it, what is the situation, political situation in Mexico, and how open is Mexico to renegotiate NAFTA in a way that might make the president feel like he's won enough to keep going?
Mm-hmm. Well, the political situation in Mexico is going through critical times. In slightly more than a year from today, there's going to be elections in Mexico, and there will be a new president. So the Mexican administration is trying to complete the review of NAFTA by the end of this year, and I think this has been agreed somehow with the U.S. There is some leeway to negotiate small things here and there. I think they are open. At the end of the game, I think that Mexico will have to accept some changes that might not be entirely beneficial to the country, but the country might be compelled to accept. However, I think that reason will prevail. I don't envision a future without NAFTA. I think that the consequences will be no less than catastrophic to both countries. I think that the price of goods and services will go up immediately, overnight. The impact for Mexico, of course, will be much greater because the size of our exports compared to the size of the economy. But in the U.S., it will be also felt in a big way. Again, I am hopeful and we are doing everything we can in the Texas-Mexico Center for Reason to Prevail to show, using the trade and the situation between Texas and Mexico as an example, because we think that what is going on between Texas and Mexico in terms of economic integration is further away. It's ahead of the game related to what is going on between the U.S. and Mexico in relation. So we need to use this as an example to prove that there are benefits, untapped benefits, and change this approach to review NAFTA just to correct some imbalances. Why don't we create a vision of a better future? And I think that Mr. Trump will understand, since he is a businessman. In order to put together a plan, you need to create a vision, then understand where you are, but have a clear idea of where you are going to. Does the U.S. administration have an idea of how they would like NAFTA to look like? I don't think so. I think they're looking at small issues here and there, because mostly this was a campaign issue. And this is a short-sighted approach. in my view. And I think that we, as citizens, have the responsibility to make our voices heard in this matter.
Well, there's just one other dynamic I think important to remember, which was touched on, which is the U.S. has a certain complacency based on the success of the last 2 decades. Very few people remember that the U.S. Mexican relationship has not always, in fact, been this collaborative and this constructive. We have a tendency in this country to imagine that American politics are the only politics in the world. And to the extent that, in fact, we take actions that are thoughtless, there will be some instinct towards retaliation. I think it could affect the Mexican election in ways that would not be good for our long-term relationships. You will also see opportunities for Mexico to look to other trading partners, as is the case with Canada. And it is worth noting that we don't mention the word Canada a lot, but they, in fact, are a vital part of this relationship. We also are complacent about the benefits of having friends on our borders. We are the only continental nation that has true friends on north and south borders. And so I think the security arguments and the extent to which people see, instead of America first, North America first, the capacity to have the North American continent be that economic and security superpower, I think those are probably the arguments more than supply chain and economic integration, which I agree are fundamentally important, but I think it is the larger sense of the U.S. and North America's role in the world that is likely, in fact, in the long run, to vindicate the agreement.
I'm going to throw it out for questions now. Anybody have questions they'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
So, comment first and then ask you to, okay. It seems that the entire panel has not, as hardly any other country has, not learned the lesson of the 2016 election. And the lesson of the 2016 elections is that the common man thinks that all arrangements are in place to keep the powers that be entrenched and to benefit them. So Trump will win again if they're not convinced that that is not the case. So being in your own dynamic, you're just pushing back. The key is, how do you make the common man understand that NAFTA is not a game that benefits large Mexican industrialists, Mexican and U.S. politicians, and instead is transparent and gives them a way to benefit themselves in a transnational environment?
I think one point you make is that we need as much or more stories than studies. I think giving people macroeconomic, global 14 million, again, that tends to be the language we stumble into, but it really is localizing the discussion. I think some of my colleagues up here have a lot of capacity to do that. I think the other piece is, again, this is part of the fabric of a larger conversation. The Mexican ambassador to the U.S., Geronimo Gutierrez, very, very strategic guy. We were talking the other day about the need to move an infrastructure bill through the U.S. to deal with regulatory and tax reform, the sense that we have to think about that fundamental larger dynamic and create, if people have opportunities, they will be less aggressive.
People need to see the opportunity. People need to see it as individuals. As long as they see it as a long law that they can't understand without going to law school and practicing law for 30 years, and they don't see a dynamic that benefits them, while our economy and our wages stagnate, they're going to want to toss out those kind of things, NAFTA. That may not be wise, but that's the way they're going to think. And unless you guys can orient yourself to showing and maybe modifying NAFTA and these kinds of things to show a path to success, you're going to have the mass of the middle America that is not being benefited by high levels of social programs like the two coasts are against these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yes, yes.
A couple things. So, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and it's something that NASCO's been working on for decades and have dealt with a lot of the naysayers of NAFTA in the past, before Trump even was running for election. And we learned a lot from that. So we do, like I've said, we're a grassroots membership organization. We do a lot of work at the grassroots level on having events to invite the local communities together to talk about the importance of freight movement and trade agreements and how those trade agreements affect their daily lives personally. We've also we added a new focus area probably 5 or 6 or 7 years ago now on workforce training to help seek out the best practices in training programs for entry and mid-level logistics and manufacturing training programs to help connect areas that don't have those programs readily available, or that the people that live in those areas don't know how to get to a training program.
They don't want a top-down solution. They want a bottom-up solution. They want to see that they can individually come into it and solve their own problems. And a
Right.
perfect example,
You don't think training does that?
training is a top-down thing, right? We're going to train you. We're going to tell you what to do. They want to be able to come up.
No, there's all sorts of training.
And a perfect example of what is beneficial to the common man is the new digital currency movement. It's bringing us internationally together. And meanwhile, you got a bipartisan group that just proposed a new bill which would clamp down on digital currency. This whole thing where this mirage that the leaders live in, that they aren't creating matrices for individual success instead of these top-down things, it's going to be a continual populist movement until that's figured out.
Sir, I think your point is well taken, but it's harder than you're suggesting. And one of the opportunities with the reform of NAFTA is to deal with these digital issues. But I'm a little suspicious that a digital side agreement to NAFTA is going to address your fundamental concerns. So I think you're going to have to work with us a little more than you are right now in figuring out the stories that actually, to your point, will compel regular people who are not part of this panel and are not reading our newspapers. I mean, it's not easy.
Well, we're talking about jobs and wages. If you
Yes.
or one of your family members used to make $25 or $35 an hour, and now they work in the service industry and they make $12 an hour. Sure. I mean, and it's not just NAFTA that has been the driving force behind it, but NAFTA has been part of this dynamic, and so it can be blamed. People will say, well, NAFTA just took our jobs and sent them to Mexico, and now nobody can find a decent job anymore. We have to all go work in the service industry. I mean, I think people will feel. I think his point really speaks to the issue of money. I mean, can you find a job in this country if you have if you're a high school graduate that gives you a decent, dignified wage? And I think some of the suspicion that he's talking about is in and around these issues, correct?
No, look, absolutely, which is why, again, I'll go back to suggesting it's not just NAFTA. We need good jobs. Investing $1 trillion in infrastructure will help a lot. Dealing with tax reform and regulatory relief will help a lot. So we just have to understand it's part of a larger economic fabric.
I'm sorry, I just want to add, though, and I know you disagree with me on the training, but, I mean, NASCO's really taken a hard look at this and tried to do everything we can, but we're not, I don't see it as a top-down. I see it as trying to help educate people that might not have a job. I think most people out there want to work. They don't want to sit around and do nothing. They want to work. So connecting them to opportunities. A lot of people think out there that logistics and manufacturing jobs are not good jobs, and that you're in a warehouse all day, they're dirty, whatever. They don't know about the opportunity for great career paths in logistics and manufacturing jobs and advancing through those career paths and getting paid a lot of money over the course of time. And so what we're trying to do is help raise the awareness that there are good jobs out there. There are plenty of jobs out there. What we're lacking is the skills. Our workforce doesn't have the skills that those jobs require. So if we can try to connect up people that might have lost their jobs or are feeling downtrodden and get them the skills that they need to then go apply for those jobs and get on a great career path, I know people may disagree, but I think that's a really great opportunity and something that we're putting a lot of effort into. Whether they lost their job because of NAFTA or just want a career change or something like that, or displace, vets coming back that don't have work. We are doing everything we can to raise awareness, connect people to training programs, connect community colleges to training programs that they may not have, to provide those workers the skills to get them on a better life and a good career path.
I have a question over here.
Are there just a couple of specifics of where NAFTA could be tweaked, whether it's immigration policy or a border adjustment tax, or is there something specific that you all have in mind that could make the agreement better?
Sure. There are a handful of opportunities, none of them profound, right? I mean, the basic structure is pretty solid, but there is no good digital component, right? There's intellectual property issues that can be improved upon. NAFTA doesn't deal very effectively with services and financing. I think the conversation earlier about the capacity for U.S. banks in the service industry to be more engaged in creating loans and capital and economic opportunities in both countries. And each country gimmicks around a little bit. You know, I mean, Mexico's not perfect. There are what they call non-trade tariffs. I mean, so, you know, there are opportunities to improve the agreement, but if we get to the desire to have a U.S. trade surplus in every relationship we have, then we're basically swimming against an impossible stream.
Yes, well, can you just wait for the mic?
This follows on from that question. Did I read recently that Secretary Ross came up with a new agreement for sugar under NAFTA? I remember in the early life of NAFTA in the mid to late 90s, there was a sugar crisis primarily in Mexico that everyone blamed NAFTA on, and I think it was substituting non-sugar items for sugar. But anyway, he announced that he came to some agreement on sugar lately. Is that one of these tweaks that was previously asked about?
Yeah. Yes. Either of you want to?
I know what it's all about.
Do you know?
It is a complex agreement. I won't go into details because it's beyond my capacity, but two of the kind of thorns in the paw of the North American agreement have been sugar and softwood, timber. The U.S. and Canada have actually now struck agreements. I think Mexico took a little more of a haircut on the sugar agreement than probably they wanted to, but it does vindicate the capacity of the countries now to solve these problems.
And just to add on to that, I'm not a sugar expert by any stretch, so I don't know all the details of that. But what I did, one of my takeaways, and several people that I've talked to, are that when Ross negotiated that agreement, when he came back to the United States sugar industry, they weren't happy with it. And so he negotiated an agreement with some flexibility to amend it and tweak it. And then he did work with the U.S. sugar industry to get them to make some slight amendments that Mexico approved to make them happier with things. But I think what it shows us is that, we're hearing this America first, America first, America first, like it's the U.S. way or the highway kind of thing. But in that negotiation, Ross had a very cool head. He recognizes the importance of negotiating. It's not a win-lose situation. You've got to work with your partners. And I think a good takeaway from that is that he was willing to work with the partners and actually kind of upset the U.S. sugar industry for a bit and then worked with them to get an agreement that they would like and be able to support. And I think it shows a good maybe foundation for how those NAFTA negotiations might go when you get into really critical, difficult, 10, 20, 30-year wars on issues, that hopefully there are some cooler minds out there that are handling these negotiations for us to really try to work on a win-win-win.
Other questions? Yes, you'll just wait for the mic.
He's got it already.
Okay, great.
Pre-approved.
How you doing? I spent my life in manufacturing. When I began my career to now, we've lost 40% of the manufacturing jobs, okay? But the population went up 45%. That's a big loss. Now, in some of these comments I'll add, I don't know if you can separate China's entry to WTO and NAFTA, because they both are playing the low-cost country card. Mm-hmm. And then you say, what did you replace them with? What happened to those jobs? Well, the first factor you need to look at is if you lost 7 million manufacturing jobs, you lost a lot of auxiliary jobs. I started my career as an electrical engineer, and can you believe that there's declining employment in electrical engineering now? So if you look at it, light truck manufacturing, for every 1 job you get 11 more. Petroleum refinery, 7.8. Automobile assembly, 5.4. Steel pipe, 5.4. Pharmaceuticals, 5.7. So what did we grow? What did we grow in the last 15 years? Well, I'll tell you, retail, 0.66x. We get half a job from that job. Leisure, 0.66. Education, 0.72. And we got 1,250% increase in education costs to the colleges. Professional business and business services, 0.61. So what does that mean to the guy in Ohio or Wisconsin? You mean? He used to make $1,000 a week. Now he's making $400. Why do you think he's mad? Now, let's talk about Mexico for a minute. NAFTA has been in effect for 20 years. 20 years. And the average increase in wages in Mexico is 0.23% over that 20-year period. So they haven't benefited. Poverty rate, flat. But I'll tell you what is really shot up is the corruption index in Mexico. At the beginning of NAFTA, it was about 26 on the list out of 176 countries. Now it's like 125. So the people of Mexico, if they vote for the left-wing guy, they'd be mad at America, but they should be mad at their lack of opportunity. That's why they came here, right? And I don't know if to stop, because Mexico is still losing 100,000 citizens every year by the UN report. So it's just not an American issue here, but it's really a Mexican issue too. I'll leave Canada out. But so it's something that needs to be fixed.
And do you have a question, sir?
Well, no, it's a statement. I know that.
Okay.
But, you know, there's not a lot of, like the gentleman over here said, there's not many people talking about the American worker on all these panels. It's the third one I've been to.
Your statement's very well said.
If I may.
Yes,
If I may. I think that imposing tariffs on automobiles built in Mexico will not bring job backs to Detroit. It will never happen. I won't see any scenario in which these manufacturing plants in Mexico will ever move back in a significant way to the US. Manufacturing jobs are being lost not only in the US, in all developed countries. Service is what is growing. I think that, again, this is an opportunity. Let's create opportunities through this agreement to create jobs also in the US, to see quick wins that the gentleman here mentioned. We need to see something tangible, something that the people really feel they are gaining some benefit. Energy might be one of the sectors. Mexico has a tremendous deficit in energy today, and it's a growing deficit. So I think that Texas might benefit from further expanding this energy interaction with Mexico. And in relation to your comment of the growth in wages in Mexico and economic growth in Mexico, imagine what it would have been without NAFTA. NAFTA contributed to 1% of economic growth to the country since it's been in force. So it would have been negative growth. And the US needs a prosperous country on the south of the border too. I heard what you say. There's a lot of issues. I think that NAFTA might not be the only solution to this situation. I think that we need to acknowledge what you say, and that this is a problem in Mexico, but it's also a problem in the US and maybe even in Canada. We need to see ourselves as a bloc.
Thank you, Mr. Liz.
You mentioned Europe, right? What kind of a run to the litter when it comes to exports for GDP? A lot of European companies are 52% of GDP is exports. Germany 46, Canada 31, Mexico 35. We're down at 12. We're down at 12. And then you talked about NAFTA for Mexico. Before NAFTA, up to 1980, you grew at 98%. I think you grew 18 during NAFTA. So the whole growth foundation has slid down to nothing.
Thank you, sir.
We just have to worry about coincidence and causation. I think those are all compelling statistics.
Good morning. I do have a question. What should be the new priority on NAFTA, globalization or regionalization?
Wait, I'm sorry, I just found you when you were talking. What was
What would be the new priority on NAFTA, globalization or regionalization?
Globalization or regionalization?
You know, I think it's an incredibly important insight in that we hope to think about this as North America's role in that global competition. And so I think to the extent, to Javier's point, that we can strengthen the regional posture, and I just come back with a moment, an ember of optimism on manufacturing, which is the incredible breakthrough on energy. We have a North American energy self-sufficiency the prices of energy, which have been significant and a barrier to U.S. manufacturing, have gone down tremendously. If we strengthen our energy integration, I think we have the capacity to begin to bring back some of those manufacturing jobs. So that argues for kind of a regionalism that I think we've been benefiting from, but we could strengthen.
Yes, sir. If you'll just wait for the microphone. Do we have one?
Here.
Yes. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
Let me introduce myself. Please. I'm Fernando. I'm the Trade and Investment Commissioner of Mexico. And just replying about the issue about the jobs. It's very important to analyze what is happening in the world. The jobs that has been declining in the labor force, it's because of the automation. So those jobs that have been lost, they are already lost. Why? Because we have the machines that are doing those jobs. So what we need to focus strongly, it's about in services. And it's what has been growing so much here in the States. No? So it's very important about what NASCO has been doing about training people, no? Because they need to be ready to do the new jobs that are coming up. So there is no way back, no? That the way that they used to do things before, it's not like that anymore. And as well, one of the things that it's very important to see is that from the investments that have gone to the States, for every job that they create in Mexico, they create 2 jobs here in the States. It can be direct or indirectly. So those jobs, they just shift. So those industries are different. And furthermore, Mexico has been the supplier of the States. So 75% of the goods that we sell to the States, you give an extra value. And it's what the economists should be focusing on it. Because you are never going to have a balance with your supplier. Thank you.
Question?
Yes, this gentleman right here.
I'm a retired builder, and the industry we haven't talked about at all is the construction business. I can assure you there is nothing in the United States, not just in Texas, but in Maine or the state of Washington, that would be built without Latin American workers. When I started in this business 45 years ago, the Latin Americans did certain kinds of things like tile. They were very good. Now they do everything. They can do it, and they can do it better. The level of craftsmanship, as you can see in the homes in Dallas, has been increased enormously. One of the things about the Mexican family, it starts with the idea of an intern program. The kids go to dad to work from day one, and the girls from day one, you know. And they may not want to get into that business, but they do learn how to make a wage at a very early point in their life. Anyway, I don't know that NAFTA encourages some settlement of these issues, because it's terrible that we have a skilled workforce with people that are very apt to become great American citizens, but we don't have any way to straighten out the flow of these people into the economy. And it is an area where the union interference is relatively mild. We have a lot of free labor, free choice states, and in those states there's no argument about it, because there can't be an argument. Anyway, I don't know if NAFTA can help the construction business, but boy, if it could, and straighten out the access, the speed of getting these permits issued. I can tell you war stories about that. Anyway, that's my contribution.
Mr. Velez?
Yes. A question for you. Can all this Latin American labor force you mentioned be replaced?
Not in the United States.
Then
I mean, it's just...
We have to acknowledge a reality.
Yes.
Those workers are needed.
Yes.
those workers will not be attractive to the common American worker. Wages are low, is an undesirable job. But for the Latin American workforce, it's a tremendous improvement.
It is, and they're skilled. And they are skilled. Because they grew up in a family where they were taught the skills. We've just got to straighten out the paperwork.
So, sir, you are raising the modest issue of immigration reform, which is profoundly important, but they're connected.
Well, I know
They're
that,
connected.
but we won't call it that because it's the...
As a quick win to NAFTA, I think it could include a temporary workers program that they used to exist in the 60s. They will get their hands around immigration. They will be able to control the border flows. In my view, this is an area of opportunity to improve, to regulate, to manage better these temporary workers that are needed and irreplaceable in the United States.
Well, and you can see in the farming business that I'm not in, that you have the same situation.
Jason, you wanted to comment about immigration?
Well, I guess I would simply say, because we want to keep this focused on NAFTA, just to emphasize the point, if we have an effective legal immigration system, we can then address the illegal immigration system. If people are trying to feed their families and there are opportunities that they cannot fulfill legally and the U.S. economy needs this essential workforce, we are always going to have this challenge. And I think, there are opportunities. We're going to have to, I think, resituate the discussion about NAFTA, and we're going to have to address border security. If we do those two things, which are both possible, we then can re-engage on the more comprehensive legal and illegal immigration issue.
Yes.
So this isn't a question, it's perhaps a story, a personal story, directly dovetailed on his comments to the construction industry. He's correct. I worked in the construction industry for 37 years, 15 of which are in Dallas, and the construction industry definitely wants the immigration situation solved. But here's my story. In 1976, I graduated in Missouri with an electrical engineering degree. And I went to work for a contractor, which was a bit of a weird job maybe for an electrical engineer. But an unskilled labor made about 30 or 40% more than I made as a graduate engineer. Okay? Today, an electrical engineer will make 200 or 300% more than an unskilled labor in the construction industry in Dallas. So there's more to the story than supplying cheap labor. That's where some of the grievance comes from.
I think great comment.
Anyone else? I think,
Wade.
Are we waiting for? Are we trying to get Congressman Hurd?
Yes, we are. Congressman.
I have one comment that I think that I was really, when I learned the statistic at first, that was interesting about U.S. content in Mexico and Canadian goods. So just I think something we should throw out there. Doesn't really relate to anything we've been talking about, in the past couple of minutes. But when the United States imports goods from Mexico, that's what they're bringing in the importing from Mexico is 40% of U.S. content, meaning that our goods cross the border back and forth so much during production that when we technically import something from Mexico, 40% of that product is U.S. content. Mm-hmm. And from Canada, importing from Canada, 25% is U.S. content. So it does go to show how our integrated supply chains and having jobs, jobs in Mexico are linked to jobs in the U.S. and to jobs in Canada. I'm going to be saying that the right way. But basically, without the jobs in Mexico and Canada, we would have fewer jobs in the United States. The U.S. jobs are there to support that integrated supply chain. So whether you're bringing it in from Mexico, 40% of what you're bringing in is U.S. and 25% from Canada. I think it's a telling statistic, so I just wanted you guys to know that. I don't really have a particular purpose or direction I'm heading with
I
it.
wonder if we could ask the congressman to join us. Oh, okay. I thought he was here. I mean, I think one of the things that has become apparent, is he here? All right.
I'm from Washington, so I can give very long answers if that's helpful at all.
I mean, I think one of the things that's become apparent in this conversation is that the beautiful and intelligent assembled here and the good work they do in and around the issue of NAFTA is not necessarily connected to the political outcome of these negotiations and what's going to happen in Washington, D.C. I was interested that you thought that the North American Free Trade Agreement was so vulnerable that if you asked for a show of hands, you were uncertain that you were going to win the day. How do you win the day if what you want is the continuation of this agreement, given the fact that we have some very strong feelings, both in this room and across the country, that NAFTA has wrecked manufacturing in this country or helped wreck it if it wasn't the only cause? And whether that's true or not, I mean, we can debate that, but there is that perception, correct?
I'll give you a three-part answer. The first is we do have to personalize it, right? We are not going to compel, I mean, these are local representatives, and we are not going to answer this question with macroeconomic statistics. There is good work happening. I think places like Texas, I think mayors, I think states, I think governors are doing a better job of making these points, but we all need to do more of that on a personal level. We have to address the fundamental problem, right? NAFTA is being held accountable, probably beyond its responsibility, for a very fundamental problem, which is the loss of opportunity and hope and the mistrust of institutions and the alienation that so many people feel. And so we have to address that, and there are ways to do it. And I will end, as I see the glorious congressman arrive, with a quick tale. And Will, I'm gonna set the bar high with this one. Trent Lott, terrific senator who we work with closely, is a senator from Mississippi. He had asked John Stennis, who had always described as a statesman, what do you got to do around here to be called a statesman? And Stennis basically said, you got to do the right thing, and then you got to go home to your constituents and tell them why. And there is going to be an obligation for some leadership. And I think the good news is that we have leaders in this country who are able and willing to do that. So, Congressman?
Congressman, you've already been
I've warmed it up for you, buddy.
All right, we're warming up. Good to see you, brother. Sorry about this. Yeah, take it over here.
Yes, please.
Good to see y'all. Hey, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you too.
Pleasure. You know, I probably should have drove up here. It would have been quicker. But couple of points. And you already went through my background, but I just want to make sure you're clear. I represent 29 counties, from San Antonio to El Paso down to Eagle Pass. 820 miles of the border. It takes 10 and a half hours to drive from one corner of my district to the other at 80 miles an hour, which is actually the speed limit in most of the district, but as my chief of staff found out last weekend, it's not the speed limit in all of the districts. Trade is vital to my part of the district, but we have to stop talking about NAFTA as a border issue. NAFTA affects our entire state. That's why I'm glad we're doing this event here in Dallas at the Bush Center, because Texas needs to take the lead when it comes to NAFTA 2.0. We all know that trade between Mexico and Texas has increased 110%. That's just since 2004. Our economy is dependent on trade with Mexico. Now, I just finished reading a book called Against the Tide. It's by a professor at Dartmouth, and as a good Texas Aggie, I generally don't look to Dartmouth for much, but this book talks about economic thought prior to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And in the first half of the book, it talks about economic thought in the early 1700s. And we could have been reading the newspaper from today, right? This is, when it comes to trade, we've had, mountains and valleys on this topic, and I think we're coming out of a valley right now. Yes, we create jobs from exports, but we create jobs from imports as well. And these are some of the basic economic principles that I think we've taken for granted, and we have to remind ourselves and remind other parts of folks in the rest of the country. There are 30 states where Mexico is the #1 or #2 trading partner. Those folks in those states need to understand this. And so as we go through and trying to achieve what a NAFTA 2.0 looks like, and to me, NAFTA 2.0 is simple: energy, data economy. 23, 24 years ago, when NAFTA was signed in my hometown of San Antonio, the word Eagleford was not on people's lips. You did not have direct foreign investment in the energy sector in Mexico. These are two major changes that if we standardize the regulatory environment around trade between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, we're going to be able to increase our competitiveness in the rest of the world. That's going to make sure our economy stays strong and continues to grow. We're going to see, when you decrease the light bill in places, guess what? You increase the cost of living. And that's one way you can address and deal with some of the crime issues that is a joint problem between us and Mexico and northern Mexico. So this is not going to be easy. The next step that's going to happen in this conversation is the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Representative is going to announce their negotiating principles sometime in probably mid-July. And that's going to show what are the key issues we want to look at, what's going to be the left and the right balance. But we got to continue to prepare the battle space for when this comes through Congress, because we don't know if we're going to want to vote for it or against it. Hopefully it's going to be a vote for it, because that we're going to focus on those areas that's going to make NAFTA stronger. And President Peña Nieto, President Trump, and Prime Minister Trudeau have already said that we can improve NAFTA, so let's focus on that. So this is a big issue. It's a complicated issue, but it starts by us continuing to educate our fellow citizens, me educating my colleagues with the help of folks like our illustrious panel today, and we have to start making the case and reminding people the importance that this trade agreement has done for the state of Texas and the importance going forward. So I think I'm going to stop there.
Well, Congressman, let me ask you this. How would you rate your level of confidence inside your own body that NAFTA 2.0 is going to become a reality, given the politics of the situation?
Well, I think the politics are changing. And if you look at the draft memo or the alleged draft memo that came out of Commerce a couple of months ago, if that is indeed the thinking from Commerce, then I think we're going to be okay. But as I've learned in my 2 years and 5 months in Congress, until it's written down and inked, you don't know what the bill's going to actually be. So I think we can get it through, because the economy is our #1 priority. And as we're debating the issue of tax reform, I think my Republican colleagues recognize that in November of 2018, if people feel like they have more money in their pocket and the economy is doing better, we're going to be okay. And one of the ways to ensure that is that we don't do anything to disrupt, but we strengthen our trade relationships with Mexico and Canada.
I'm going to offer questions for the congressman. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think the conversation that, because of the airline delays, you didn't hear, but basically, the conversation here came to what I think it is nationally. Everybody sees when a factory closes and it goes to Mexico, everybody sees locally very intensely, my city, my town has just lost jobs. What they don't see is that there may be other jobs created from the free trade. The farmer that's selling more corn or wheat, the logistics people, they're getting jobs. Net, when you look at the data, in theory, more jobs are created than are lost, but people don't see the jobs created because they're dispersed. And so it has become an incredibly sensitive, hot-button topic. The current president won his position largely, because they say, because people felt displaced. My jobs have been lost, nobody cares, and NAFTA and other trade agreements are the reason why. How do you try and fight that? Because the people on the panel have tried to do it, but let's hear your opinion.
So I've told all my Mexican friends that are CEOs of businesses, Rossini is a company that has created thousands of jobs in Ohio and Michigan. Ohioans and Michigans, or Michiganders, is that the right, Michiganders? Right, they don't know that Rossini's a Mexican company. Everybody knows Sara Lee, right? We all enjoy Sara Lee products. Most people don't know it's owned by Bimbo, a Mexican company, right? And so the issue is that some of these, and I've told my friends that you have to speak up and talk about the role that you're having in some of these local communities. Because, yes, there have been some jobs lost, and trade has affected some communities. But if you want to talk about San Antonio, Texas, where Toyota plant created thousands of jobs, if you want to talk about how Rossini is creating jobs in Eagle Pass, El Paso, the city of El Paso was impacted early on, but they've seen a change in their economy. So we have to articulate, well, look, we're a couple miles from Cowtown. Everybody likes to have affordable beef, right? We have affordable beef because NAFTA opened up 2 $1 billion markets for the U.S. beef industry. So the positive examples are there. We have taken them for granted, and we have to continue to talk about that so people understand the impact. And I tell some of my friends that are involved in this, we don't need more op-eds in New York Times. We need the op-eds in the Des Moines Register and in the El Paso Times, right? And so that's how we can create this case. And when 30 states, when their economy is going to be impacted if we get this wrong, that's a pretty motivating factor. And so here in Texas, we need to lead the way. We need to have local, state, and federal officials stand up and talk about the importance of NAFTA and the importance it is on our economy. And if Texas can do that, we can lead and articulate that to some of our other states. So I would say the rhetoric from the campaign is changing, but it's going to require us to take some tough stands and say what's already happening, because the facts don't lie.
Congressman, the president, campaigned throughout the Midwest and throughout much of the country on the idea that I'm going to stand up for you, the American worker who's lost his good job, and I'm going to keep my promise. What sort of things have to happen in order for President Trump to feel like he's kept his promise and he can go with this agreement?
I wish I knew the answer. Only one person knows that answer, and that's President Trump. But if we do things, if we strengthen this, if we improve the energy sector, if we make North America competitive in other parts of the world, if we're able to start selling our energy to Eastern Europe, right? And that's one way we keep our folks in jobs, but we can also, that's another way to deal with the Russians, by the way. If we are able to continue to strengthen the agricultural sector, if we're able to make it easier, if we're able to bring some money back from our tax from tax reform, as well, these are things that are being done concurrently, and that we can say, hey, this is strengthening. We're not going to make T-shirts in the U.S., right? But are we creating the macroeconomics that makes sense? And look, Toyota is creating jobs in San Antonio. Rossini is creating jobs in Ohio. There are so many examples of how these jobs are being created. And I guarantee you, once this agreement is inked, there's billions of dollars worth of investment that is not happening along the border in northern Mexico or South Texas because people are worried about where this is going to go. You ink a deal that improves, that strengthens NAFTA, that upgrades NAFTA, you're going to see billions of dollars worth of investment happen overnight, and that's going to create jobs in industry.
Does it your sense that bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. has to be a part of that equation? The president was very pleased with the carrier negotiation. Does that have to be part of it, or you think that's probably not going to happen?
I think there's going to be some jobs created in those parts of the world that the president will take credit for. So, and that is You know, as long as those new jobs are created, I think that's going to be a win-win for everybody. But we have to remember, this has to be done this year, because we cannot go into negotiations in 2018. We cannot go into negotiations with some of the leading candidates on the Mexico side, because they will make NAFTA worse for everybody, and that's going to have a tectonic impact on our economy.
What if the president decides no deal is better than a bad deal? What will be the impact for your district?
It's billions of dollars. You're going to see the price of gas, clothes, beer all increase, right? It's going to ultimately be a de facto tax increase, because the cost of so many of the things that we purchase are going to rise. You're going to see jobs lost, especially throughout my district, and you're going to see commerce lost in places like San Antonio, because you're not going to have as many people coming in and shopping in our malls and eating in our restaurants and staying in our nice hotels. So it's going to have a major impact on the South Texas economy.
Would some of those manufacturing jobs come back? Those auto manufacturing, other types of manufacturing jobs? Do you believe that?
So I'm not an economist, and I didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So, but I don't see it. I don't see how those kinds of jobs come back. The amount of the reinvestment that would take to rebuild some of that infrastructure. And besides, 40% of the stuff that is produced in Mexico is from parts made in the United States of America. That number is 25% in Canada, and for comparison, it's only 4% in China. And so we already make things together. And so let's double down on that perspective.
Congressman, anything you'd like to say I haven't given you the chance to?
Well, I think we've kept everybody here a little bit too long because of my departure, but I appreciate the center hosting this conversation. I appreciate the work that my friends at BPC do on this important issue, and I appreciate you all coming out here and caring, because this really is about making sure we keep Texas the greatest place to do work and the greatest place to live. And if we do that for Texas, it's going to have an impact on the rest of the country. So thank you all for letting me be here today.
Great.
Well, often you hear someone say, I'm the last person keeping you from your meal. I'm the last person keeping you from going outside into the rain. But I do want to thank our colleagues and the other organizations for giving the World Affairs Council an opportunity to be involved with this, because really one of our goals is to engage the American public, and particularly Dallas-Fort Worth, in important international issues. And Matt, you know, I was thinking 2 years is a lot's happened. You know, it was really just 2 years ago when then candidate Trump walked down those stairs. And if you'd said NAFTA to most people, they wouldn't have had any idea what you were talking about. And when we did programs on trade just a year and a half, 2 years ago, you couldn't fit, there'd be probably a third or quarter of the people that are in this room. And I think that says something right there. And I have just 3 quick observations. One, we have focused on the economy and business. And yet, trade agreements are so much more than that. They really are a framework for political discussion, geostrategic strategy, cultural ties. And if we don't do this correctly, there is no doubt that there are other countries, and particularly one country, that is very eager to fill that void. And Mexico and Canada do have options. The other thing is, I think it is so important, and the Congressman said this, for you who care about this issue to talk to others, talk to your employees, talk to your colleagues, and indeed, while it may be great for your ego to have an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, it is just as important to have an op-ed in one of our, not just the Dallas Morning News and Fort Worth paper, but some of our weekly regional, or rather smaller town newspapers. And it is also absolutely key, I think, that the rhetoric
is getting ahead of everything else. We saw that in this country. Candidate Trump could have just as easily talked more about automation. He could have talked about education and training, but he talked about Mexico because it was easy for something. It was an easy whipping post. And as has been said today, our relations with Mexico have not always been as strong and as close as they are today, and that could be lost so very quickly. We were talking about this just before the program, that there really is a generation right now, think about it, 3, 4, 5 years of young teenagers who have heard anti-American slogans, just how in this country they're hearing more against Mexico. So we all have a responsibility in this room who care about these issues to think about them and talk to others. So with that, I want to thank everybody for being here. Go out, enjoy another rainy day in Dallas, Texas.